So welcome to this POCACITO network update. I'm Max Grunig. I mean, most of you, everybody, I think, knows me, so no need to say much about that. Thank you so much for joining us here tonight or today, depending on where you are. We are very happy to have three wonderful speakers here with us, all from the POCACITO community. And that's, of course, the whole idea of the POCACITO updates is to have people from POCACITO talk about their lives. And if you have questions, I would like to ask you to either send them in a text message to me. That's a very good way to reach me, or put it in the chat function here in the system. That way I can screen a little bit. It's not a form of censorship, but it's just to see so we can get similar questions pulled together, etc. I hope we get to have questions anyway. I don't want to drag this on for too long, so I hope we have time for conversation later. We will jump right into the conversation with the presentations of our three speakers right away, because we only have an hour, we have three speakers, and we have probably hundreds of questions. So let's start right away. Let me just introduce them real quick so you have an idea who's here with us. And of course, most of you know them, but not everybody knows them. So if you know them already, well, I hope it's so interesting for you to hear a little bit about what who's gonna speak and what they're gonna say. So we have Donna here. Donna is a freelance consultant and provides strategic consulting, advising, and advocacy around various aspects of ecology, environmentalism, sustainability, resilience, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And she works at You Hope Consulting. And of course, Donna, I hope I was not mixing things up too badly in there. So then you can just say what is to be added or what was wrong with that. Jordie, I'll try the same with you. So we have Jordie Vasquez. She's an architect by training and green urbanist by heart, with a passion for sustainability, diversity, and inclusion, and is to be reached at urbanonsite.com. And we have a third speaker here. And of course, I should have said something for the regional picture, because we're all in different places, different time zones. So Donna is in New York. Jordie is also usually in New York City, but now New Jersey. But it's just very, very nearby. And then we have Floyd. Floyd, you're in Baltimore. And Floyd Godsey is in Baltimore, and he's an urban farmer. He's a master gardener and farmer, and is running his own urban farm, and is also working on different farm projects, and is, of course, always looking for new opportunities. His focus is fighting, or I shouldn't say it sounds so violent, but reducing urban food deserts. And I think, of course, now with the pandemic, this has become an issue all of a sudden everybody is interested in. And so we'll hear more about that. And of course, now we had also more events in the last weeks. I'm not going to get into this, that stirred up this whole discussion about racial equity and what that has to do with sustainability and environmentalism. And this is kind of the topic, even though anything can be said today, so it's not like too strict. We're going to jump right into the presentations, unless the speakers want to add something right away that I forgot to say.
Let's do it, Max.
Okay, so Donna, since you're set, you were speaking right away. I'll think you start with the slides. Is that good for you?
Yes, it is.
Great. Okay, let me try to start the slides. And let me know if there's anything not showing. Good.
Not showing on my screen yet.
And that's an old slide. I did.
Okay, get it. Okay, I'll open the new one. And Jordie, it might be that in your slide, in your screen, you might have to adjust how it shows the...
Okay. Let's see.
Yeah. Let's see.
Perfect. Yeah, I got it now.
Good. Okay. Okay, so I'll try to load your new slides.
Okay.
Okay, so it's telling me that I'm offline. So that's I can reload this. This is kind of funny. Here we go.
Aha. There we are.
Okay. And now I present this and then loading. That should work. Here we go. Donna.
All right. Excellent. Thank you so much, Max. Hello, everybody in the POCACITO community. My name is Donna Hope. I just recently participated in POCACITO, went to Germany this March with the other two presenters, and we got back just in time before the international travel ban of COVID. Max had asked me to present, I think over a month ago, and since it's June, which is also Gay Pride Month, I was going to do a whole thing also elevating LGBTQ rights, and I still will, but more pressing now is the issues around racial justice and how it ties into the work that I think everyone on this call and in the Ecological Institute community is involved with, so you could see exactly how it's relevant to you, and hopefully it could give some guidance and inspiration. And maybe at the end, if we have time for Q&A, we can share some of the things that you've been doing in your local community and local organizations. So I'm going to start, and then Jordie is going to go into further detail, and then Floyd is going to bring in the agriculture aspects. We're going to be talking about COVID-19, and we're going to be talking about racial justice. So I just wanted to start with just a basic background, so we're on the same page about what is environmental justice. Because I think particularly now you're probably hearing that phrase a lot more, but I don't know if everyone really understands what it means. So I just wanted to give this context that environmental justice is dealing with environmental racism. And we're talking about disproportionate impact of environmental hazards on communities of color, which is tied into institutional racism, which is systemic policies and practices that create different outcomes for different racial groups, specifically that create advantage for whites and oppression and disadvantage for people of color. And this, I wanted to have these last two lines because we're talking about the intersectionality of justice, which is another phrase you might have heard, and why it's important to understand that this work ties into the work that you do. If you work on climate justice, if you work on energy justice and access to resources around energy efficiency and sustainability and renewable energy, if we talk about social justice and gender justice, and here we are in Gay Pride Month and all the work that's happening this month. We just had the Supreme Court acknowledge that the Civil Rights Act 50 years ago does actually extend protections for non-discrimination for sexual orientation and gender identity. That had never been determined before. So we're in a really unprecedented time. Next, please, Max. So just to give a little background of context of some of the work that I've done, as Max noted, I am a freelance consultant, and I've worked also in various advisory capacities. One such advisory capacity was with an initiative called Green 2.0, the environmental diversity initiative from a nonprofit based in DC called the Rabin Group. And they commissioned a report of environmental organizations to see what exactly was the racial breakdown in the executive staff level and in the boards of governance of the top environmental organizations, including NGOs, philanthropy, and government agencies. And we found that it's pretty abysmal. There really isn't much racial diversity. At best, you have maybe 16% racial diversity at that level of governance. At worst, 0. So this report highlighted that, we went to the organizations. There was over 200 organizations, and we said, do you commit to doing better? They said yes. We said, do you commit to disclosing your data? They said yes. So this report led to a full open disclosure. You can now go online and see the racial breakdowns of these organizations. You could see if they have, for example, a chief diversity officer or diversity statement, and you could see how they have improved and sometimes how they have regressed since this report was published a few years ago. And the link, if you want to, it's a fascinating report, and there's several other reports. You can go to that website. The link is there on the upper right, diversegreen.org. And what we're saying is that with a lack of diversity, you have a lack of representation and a lack of voices and experiences. And so you can't really fully incorporate the best messaging and the best commitments to your organization. Next slide, please, Max. Another organization that I work closely with, I think those who went to Germany this March had heard me talk about eco districts. Similar to LEED with USGBC, this is a certification protocol, but instead of certifying buildings to be like LEED Gold or LEED Platinum, this is working on the district, city, and community level. So it's a more inclusive approach to working with community organizers and planners. And it prioritizes 3 imperatives: equity, resilience, and climate protection. And I've worked with them for past 3 years. I'm also Eco Districts AP. They did a huge push in the last few months because they got extra funding to provide the training and the protocol for free. And they literally doubled the numbers of people who became accredited in the last 3 months because of that. So one, they saw that cost is a factor in why more people aren't involved. And also, we're getting a lot of great feedback about how eco districts can be improved, particularly in communities of color that want to use the protocol to advance deep, meaningful, sustainable development. Right now, I am working closely with the board and the executive staff to develop a racial equity training module that did not exist, and I will be developing. And we're also going to do a revision of the strategic plan and deepen engagement with other professionals of color. If you want to hear more about eco districts or learn how to become accredited, hit me up. I'll let you know. Next slide, please, Max. So there are very important holidays coming up tomorrow. I don't know how many people on the call know about Juneteenth. You might have been hearing about it a lot more recently because there's a lot more acknowledgement, but this is an important historical commemoration of emancipation. June 19th, 1865 was the official last announcement from a Union general in Texas that formerly enslaved peoples were now free. And before, it was maybe only celebrated in small circles, particularly in Black communities, but now there's a huge push to really recognize this as a national holiday. In fact, New York State, our governor, just passed an executive order, I believe yesterday, that now Juneteenth is a paid holiday for state workers. I also know that several banks will be closing tomorrow in honor of Juneteenth. I know here, I'm in Brooklyn, there's going to be several demonstrations and marches and rallies and support, which also ties into Black Lives Matter, and just raising awareness about the fraught history of racial injustice in this country and really raising some important conversations. I just left a link here if you want to read more about it. There's a great website, juneteenth.com. And if you want to find events, that second link, you could literally zoom into a map or put in your zip code, and it will show you, not just here in this country, but also around the world, activities and actions and events that are happening to commemorate Juneteenth tomorrow. That's fine, Max, I'm ready for the next slide. Here, I just wanted to give an outline. I think Max will provide, besides this being recorded, I think you can get these slides also. I think that's fine with us because we have a lot of resources that we wanted to share with everyone on the call. Jordie and Floyd and I and my friends who work in these spaces, or just who are people of color who just exist in the world, are getting a lot of asks for, what can I read, or how can I learn more about what's going on with racial injustice? How does this tie in to coronavirus? I hear that there's a disproportionate number of cases and deaths in the Black community and in communities of color of COVID. Why is that? And how does this tie into racial injustice and Black Lives Matter? So these bullets are just some of some quick resources that you can get a better understanding of what we're talking about. Jordie is also going to go into a lot more depth about this, but at least I wanted to give some of these great links from, they're from news sources, some are from environmental organizations like Sunrise Movement or from NAACP. And the last link there, Race and Environmental Movement, is actually a webinar that was hosted by Antioch University online a couple of weeks ago. It was excellent background of the conservation movement in this country and its ties with race and the environmental movement. I highly recommend looking at that. Next slide, please, Max. Also, a lot of people have been asking, where, the economy is starting to open and what can I do to support? I think Jordie is going to go into that also in more depth, but I just wanted to give a couple of organizations that are doing some really great work to organize events and activities that are distributing resources to communities of color and particularly LGBT communities that are on the front lines and working. I really wanted to highlight that one of the initial basic tenets of Black Lives Matter always centered the LGBTQ community. Several of the organizers are themselves queer identified, and it was always recognized that if you leave out any aspect of the community as you fight for justice, that you're not going to have full success. So it's very important to elevate and center all communities, particularly the queer communities. It's the 50th anniversary of the Pride movement and Pride rights here in New York City, with Stonewall riots happening 50 years ago. We had World Pride here. Unfortunately, because of COVID, we're not having any marches or parades, but it was going to be a huge seminal year in New York City. And so it's just important to keep all these things in mind, that when we talk about intersectionality of justice, we're including this as well. Next slide, please. I just added this about 20 minutes ago because I just got this email from a former NASA mentor of mine who's a white woman. In college, I was in a amazing internship opportunity where I was working alongside world-renowned climatologists doing some climate research that was particularly for students of color in STEM. And I really loved she's stepping down, and she sent this email, and I really love that she made this statement that and this was a program that also worked with Columbia University, which is why she says the diversity discussions happening at Columbia and other workplaces are essential, not only to help process the colliding national tragedies of George Floyd's killing and the COVID-19 health crisis. We need them to help us reckon with what they represent: the historic economic and environmental injustice, education inequity, institutional racism, and undervalued lives of Black, brown, and poor people. As uncomfortable and important as these discussions are, they are low-hanging fruit. And I hope they lead to more challenging, time-consuming, and change-making work that requires patient, long-term, and evidence-based investments. I thought that was a beautiful statement, and I just wanted to share that with you all. Next slide, please, Max. I always like to give reading suggestions. It's summer. This is your summertime reading list. You got plenty of time. You're not doing nothing. These 10 books that I have here are excellent resources for specifically for the work in sustainability and urban planning, in energy democracy, in the background of Black Lives Matter, in the LGBT movement, in conservation, in agriculture. I have every single one of them. They're all fantastic. And I highly recommend them if you're looking for a book club or you're looking to introduce maybe some conversations into your communities or places of work. These are great places to start. That is my last slide. And now I'm going to turn it over to Jordie. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Donna. All right, so I am the next slide. I should be starting. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Jordie Vasquez. I am also a POCACITO alumni, I guess, from this year. It's nice to see some faces. I'm not able to see all the faces who are here today, but I appreciate you being here. It's good. It's nice to have a safe place to talk about these issues and how these issues matter, especially for the sustainability and enviro-climate folks. I believe that even though these are issues that are so intrinsic to the nature of the environment and climate justice, we are presented with a kind of a unique opportunity where these things are fresh and are being spoken almost on a daily basis, either at home, at work, with friends. So I think this is a great opportunity just to like not only look within ourselves, like to what role or extent we want to participate, but also look at the organizations that we work with and we partner. With that said, before we move, I do want to read this quote from Kimberly Dowell, who's an architect. She's the president also from the National Organization of Minority Architects, and this recently came about in an article that was talking about what life will look like post-COVID, the urban planning and design world. And it goes, somehow within a 90-day period, we experienced as a nation a recap of the Spanish flu, the Great Depression, and the Civil Rights Movement in a very tiny period of time. And that just to say that it's been 3 months and we have been hit hard with a lot of things, including COVID and the economic repercussions of that. And then now we have to also deal with police brutality and, you know, the revamp of Black Lives Matter. It's a lot. So we're going to be talking about those intersectionalities in a second. Thank you, Max. Yeah. All right. COVID-19 pandemic has exposed how systemic racism permeates sustainability, healthcare, housing, and public health. I just want to make a note that we are folks that work in environment spaces, sustainability, conservation, but if oftentimes that we tend to look at racial justice and social justice as a different issue from environment and climate, and they're really not. Like, if you're thinking about how to make a better planet that's better, a better world that's better for the planet, better for the people, and better for your profit, these are things that you need to have centering Black, Indigenous, people of color, and communities. The ones that are really affected, not really affected, are mostly affected by environmental injustices and climate justice. So I just want to make a point that if you are, you know, identifying as environmentalists, that saying Black Lives Matter and advising on the intersectionalities between the climate and racial justice, it is part of the deal. It's part of the package, and you should not see it as silo. Next, Max. Thank you. So I Can Breathe refers to more than police violence. Black communities have been struggling with not being able to breathe for many, many years. And the reason I added that quote is because when I think of not only me, but a lot of people have made these parallels. When we think about the phrase "I can breathe," you know, said by George Floyd, said also a few years back by Eric Garner, the injustice and the oppression of the moment alone, it can be, you know, translated into what has been the root cause issues of why communities of color, Black, Indigenous people, haven't been able to breathe properly. Like, we can look into, for example, like air pollution, water pollution, and all the different factors that take into account the injustices and the inequity, and have contributed, as Donna had mentioned before, to not only at this proportionate, you know, number of deaths for COVID, but also to the status of a current social climate. And I'll talk a little bit at the end of this slide about this proportionate amount of people that die from COVID that come from Black, Indigenous, and people of color community. So let's get into it. No, wait, this is gonna take a few seconds. So I wanna go one by one, and I'll try to be quick as much as I can. But first one, Black, Indigenous, people of color, and low-income communities are more likely to live in toxic buildings. So this is true if you ever work in architecture like I have, or community development. You'll notice that the buildings that are within your affordable housing pipeline, if you're doing rehab, are typically buildings that have mold, they have lead, they have asbestos, you name it. And as you know, like these are root causes for health deterioration, like asthma, for example. Second, more likely to be in a least energy efficient building. Energy efficient, it's expensive. You know, it's expensive to have your AC running all day long. It's expensive to think about solar panels when you have other priorities. It's expensive to think about changing all your lights for LED if you just don't have the capital to do so. So just something to keep in mind. Less likely to live in disaster resilient buildings with homes in floodplains. So I worked a few years back in Hurricane Sandy reliefs, and I would say that 100% of the buildings that I were working with were all in zones that were considered undesirable. They were all occupied by minorities and people of color. And it's not that they chose, I would say, to live there. It's just like that was what they were able to afford. And unfortunately, those were the homes that were deep in water up to their necks for weeks. The legacy of housing segregation policies that have left them in areas most vulnerable to sea level rise. So if we talk about housing segregation, then we have to talk about redlining and like what that meant, like how, you know, communities of color and in the 80s and 90s, they were subject to not receiving home loans and not receiving insurances from investors because, again, they were considered non-desirable areas. And we've seen to 2020 the repercussions of those decisions. So there's a lot about redlining that we can spend days talking about, but I'll just leave it there. I'll jump one, frack waysites most likely to be found in neighborhoods of color. And then I guess like the one when we're talking about environmental justice and climate justice, this is the one that sticks to a lot of us environmental folks. Coal-fired plants, landfill, waste treatment, in industrial sites, they're most likely to be in neighborhoods where the minorities are the majority of people living in there. And they are pretty much by design. They are considered, again, communities that are disinvested, communities that are not desirable. So a lot of these industrial sites end up going there. And as a result, then you have higher rates of lung cancer, higher rates of asthma, higher rates of heart disease. And this is why I mentioned at the beginning that it's no coincidence that African Americans, Black folks, are 3 times more likely to die from COVID than white people. So if you guys are familiar with Cancer Alley and, God, I'm blanking, in Louisiana, you'll notice that all those industrial sites that are like along the Mississippi River, the folks that live around there, they have a 50% higher chance of developing cancer. So it's just, you know, again, it's by design. So bringing it back and tying to the I Can Breathe, it really is a testament to a lot of these communities not being able to access capital, not being able to access proper healthcare, not being able to access just clean air and clean water. So this is a good way of tying what we work on a daily basis in the environmental world with what's happening out there. Next slide, Max. Thank you. All right, so where do we go from here? That was a lot of, I know it was heavy and it was a lot, but I wanna be able to move into what the future looks like. Where do we go from here? Reparations and economic transformation. And I wanna make it clear, when I talk about reparations, I don't want you to think of like Black Mirror, like I'm not gonna put my finger in a DNA scanner and automatically get a check every month. Like that's not what I mean here. And talking about economic transformation, I really want you to hone into the word economic because access to capital and access to money has been one of the issues that we've been encountering in low-income communities and Black folks. So next slide, we'll talk about what that looks like. Thank you. So the macro level, so we're thinking big picture here. There's a couple of things that we can think about when we talk about reparations and economic transformation. First, advancement of community-wide transition, not just a few buildings are green. I'm guilty of that as a designer and sustainability consultant. I've been in projects that are so siloed from each other, have nothing to do with each other. And I think, I know as Donna had mentioned about the eco districts, there are other solutions out there that look at wide community transitions into more sustainable, more renewable. So think about how that works. Second, Thinking about ownership, CDFIs, community development financial institution, working intentionally to provide Black families with new path to home ownership. Most of the Black and Black and brown communities, they are not able to have a title of ownership because they rent, which is also an impediment for a lot of energy efficiency and renewable technology to be applied to them. So how can we think about home ownership in the sense of Black and brown communities? Green tech companies. Think about how you can help your young upcoming talents, student loan debt repayment, education funds. Eco-friendly beauty products. So we all, familiar with 100,000 sustainability brands that brand themselves as eco-friendly or vegan or whatever. Think about, if you're in that world, how are you investing in emerging Black-owned beauty brands? How are you representing, how you're amplifying the voices of Black-owned beauty brands? The same goes for sustainable clothing. Fashion and sustainability, it's a big, big topic right now. A lot of renowned brands out there are doing great work with, fair trade. And so how are you using your platform and your voice to promote Black designer instead of profiting off of their culture and people? And what I mean by that is that I don't know if you ever heard this person, what's her name? Got Kylie and Kim Kardashian and the whole clan. They had a lot of backlash at the beginning of the year because they were very silent about Black Lives Matter and all that. But they used their platform for a lot of Black stereotype, not stereotype. I'm sorry. What's that word? My goodness, I'm forgetting. Blanking here. Appropriation. And there was no sort of comment out there how they were going to be promoting Black designers, since that's a big part of the platform. So again, if you're not working in a sustainable clothing company, it might be a little bit hard to find the link, but find a way if you are to promote Black designers. And then lastly, corporations that acknowledge the youth climate movement and women's movement. We are really quick to jump on a youth climate movement, Friday March or women's movement. But what are organizations and companies doing now to acknowledge that Black Lives Matter too? And it's not just a statement of solidarity out there. We believe in Black Lives Matter. It's actually what are the actions that you're taking in order to, not only talk the talk, but walk the walk. Next. I'm almost done, so 2 more. Thank you. So the micro, and this is how the previous slide was more of what can we do as organizations and company, and this really much narrows down to what can we do on a more personal level with our circles, our networks, and our companies. So the first one goes to something that Donna had mentioned before: the lack of diversity equals a lack of diversity in solutions. If you are a company, a nonprofit, or a corporation that does a lot of work in affordable housing, or a lot of work in low-income communities, a lot of work with indigenous, who are you sitting at the table and making the decisions with? Executive leadership. Again, if we're talking about how we care about Black Lives Matter or how we care about diversity, show me a photo of your leadership and let me see if you really are, showing and doing the walk. Let me see how many women you have in your leadership. Let me see how many people of color you have in your executive leadership. And if you don't have one now, I'll talk to you in 6 months and see how that changed. Public HR sanctions against microaggressions in the workplace. The word is very self-explanatory what microaggressions are, but I don't know if everyone here on this call have experienced microaggressions or have witnessed microaggressions. But they are what we called death by a million cuts. They're little comments that might happen from your colleagues or supervisors in the workplace, and they add up, and they might come in the way that we our performance, the way that we might show up to the workplace, the way that we might show up to a social life. So I can, connect after this and talk about what microaggressions are. But again, I think the word is very self-explanatory. Other ways, diversity guidelines and promotion policies. If you are bringing folks to the table who are Black, brown folks, and I don't want to use the word tokenize, but I'm going to use it. Just don't hire diverse folks for the sake of hiring. Make sure that you have very clear trajectory path, promotion policies, how are you keeping yourself accountable, and how are you creating a place of inclusion so that we can talk about retention in the future. And the last two bullets, advocacy for clean, renewable energy introduced to Black, Indigenous, people of color communities. We cannot talk about a just transition future or a clean energy future without including Black and brown folks into the energy job pool. I don't see how that works. So that's one. And then the last one that I have here in this slide, anti-racism involves introspection, unlearning, and actively working to dismantle structural and institutional racism. I come from the Caribbean, and we have all different layers of like what racism looks like, and how we confront and how we unlearn racism. So I understand a lot of this might not be, you know, you might consider like I'm not racist, but that's just not enough. You need to be anti-racist in this day and age. And then the last slide that I have, I feel like I've been talking a lot. Yeah. All right. So as I mentioned, I'm the co-founder of Women of Color Collective and Sustainability. We have a fund, and just before I go talk about the fund, we are a collective that exists there to amplify the voices of women of color in sustainability, providing tools, resources. I'm blanking, there's so many things. Mentorship opportunities, job opportunities. We're there pretty much to amplify their voices and connect them with those resources. So we recently partnered up with Latinos to Sustainability and Kinetic Communities to put a fund out there to help women of color pioneers during COVID-19. If you know of a woman of color who is a pioneer and it will be a good fit, let me know. I would love to share information. If you're not a woman or a person of color, but you still would like to be involved, you can donate. There's also a link for that. And you can look it up, or you can reach out to me directly. I can tell you more about it. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Jordie. Floyd, are you ready?
Yes, I am. How's everybody doing today? I'm just going to jump into it. 1 second, let me get mine up. You got good. There we go. I just want to give a real basic overview. I mean, because this subject is, trying to run through it in like 5-10 minutes doesn't give it justice. We can go on for days about this, something like this, for hours. But I want to give an overview onto how we got to where we are in this country, and give more of like on the economic side and a political side on the disenfranchisement and what the root of a lot of this frustration is. And as a Black farmer, and understanding that, civilization is based in farming, and how that was uprooted from Black people here in this country, from Black Americans in this country. Farming in crisis, how did we get here? There's a period in this country called the Nadir period, and it was from 1880 to 1920s, and it's also referred to as Civil War 2.0, and it's considered to be the worst period in race relations in this country. And this was the period where, after Reconstruction, whites in the South had an insurrection, and they stripped all economic and political gains, particularly in the South, after the end of slavery. And it was ran through state-sponsored terrorism with the United States government. And of course, now with Trump having his rally in Tulsa and bringing light with the 99 or 100-year anniversary of the Tulsa riots, or the Tulsa massacre, kind of sheds light on that event. And that's one example of what was happening across the entire country through this period. What resulted in that was widespread Jim Crow segregation, Jim Crow laws. So at the same time as the economic footing was being pulled from Black America, segregation laws, in which these segregation laws wasn't just so that, okay, you have to drink from this particular water fountain. We're talking about access to banking, access to material resources, these type of things, which is your foundation to be able to develop yourself as a society, okay? And then the outcome of this was the forced migration of African Americans out of the South out of the South and into the urban centers of the North, the Midwest, and Western America. Okay, next slide, please. Now let's weigh the scales, okay? In 1900, Black farmers owned 15% of the American farmland. And today it is 0.5. And some places you can find even lesser than that. The Census of Agriculture does a recurring census run, just like the census that's going on here about the population. In 2017, the United States had a little over, but close to 50,000 producers of Black farmers, or farmers identified as being Black. And they accounted for 1.4% of the country's 3.4 million producers. And they lived on the farm or primarily in the southeast or mid-Atlantic states. Their farms were smaller in value, and the value of their agricultural sales makes up less than 1% of the U.S. total. Okay, next slide, please. And and this is from an article talking about just Black farmers and the state of Black farmers. According to the Center of American Progress, this is another think tank, they found that the average full-time white farmer made about 17, and this is after expenses, this is just your basic income on your farm, okay? And there's a lot of money that goes into farming, but this is your basic income after all the expenses, et cetera. White farmers made a little over $17,000 in income in 2007, while the average full-time African-American farmer made just close to $2,500. What must be noted is that institutions like the USDA were weaponized against Black farmers. And one of the tactics used was to prevent any kind of support for mechanization. And this caused Black farmers unable to compete and sustain an agricultural enterprise in the 20th century. Okay, good to note as well that there was a lawsuit, a class action lawsuit against the USDA back in 1999 called the Pickford Clickman, Pickford versus Clickman. And it was a USDA lawsuit. And it was in return, they found that through the period from the New Deal period from the 1930s, after the Nadir period, that Black farmers were widely discriminated through the USDA, refusing to give any type of support, and up into about $2 billion has been distributed to farmers nationwide, to Black farmers. Next slide, please. Now, government handouts. Now, we like to talk about, they always use the phrase, you need to pull yourself up from your bootstraps, but how do you pull yourself up from your boots when your boots have been stolen and the person telling you to pull yourself up is the one that stole your boots? The Homestead Act were a set of laws that were enabled white peasants from Europe to acquire 160 acres of 160 million acres of a land grant. Now, this is all the land that was west of the Mississippi River, okay? And this is during the period, during the 1862, okay? These acts included subsidies, which facilitated the purchase and mechanization and the use of the land. Something else to note is that when this act came into place, slavery did not end. Okay, so many Black people after the end of slavery, which officially ended in 1865, did not have access to the Homestead Act, did not have access to these resources. Okay, the first set of the Homestead Act did not have access to these resources because they were still in slavery. But continue. Next slide, please. Now, how can we undo the damage? Reparations are what we demand, and it's time to cut the check. More access. What do we need? And what do we want? More access to resources and financial support via the federal and state local governmental bodies like the USDA and other farm bureaus across the country. Support for education for future farmers. One thing to note that through urban farming and the urban farming movement that has started taking course in the past 10 to 20 years, that you have because a lot of Black people are centered in these urban centers. They have an interest in farming, but do not have access to the capital to be able to purchase land and to get into farming. While simultaneously, those who are the current farmers, they're aging out. The average farmer is anywhere between 40 to 50 years old. And there needs to be an insurgence of farmers coming up to replace these farmers. So there is a need in farming, and farming in general across the country is in crisis. Farmer suicide is at an all-time high. Banks are foreclosing on farms across the country, and many of them are being sold to foreign farm enterprises from anywhere from like the Netherlands to China. I know that's a big one that's always talked about, but also a lot of European companies are purchasing a lot of the arable land across this entire country, particularly the Netherlands. Okay, companies from the Netherlands, and so there is a need for farmers, and there's people who are interested in farming, but they need the support to be able to gain access to the land and resources to be able to sustain such an enterprise. Now, what can you do? You can inform yourself, which I'm on the next slide over. There's a list of resources or articles just to give you a nice foundation on the information that I presented here. Educate others, and could start creating pathways for access. No matter what level you're on, you could. I'm not sure what everybody does exactly, but get involved. And if you think, how can we make this happen? How can we do that? It's fairly simple. The Homestead Act, like I just mentioned, the Southern Homestead Act, et cetera, et cetera. And I'll also list the settlement case with the USDA as well. And at the bottom, if you have some time, check out the video. There's a video link to Martin Luther King, where he explains, this is one of his last speeches, he explains exactly what I'm describing. And one of the many reasons that for why I believe that personally that he was silenced, because he was addressing the exact issue that I'm describing to you now, that of this economic footing that was pulled from Black farmers and pulled from black people. And we're talking to also keep in mind that during this period, during the Nadir period, they always talk about the mass lynchings that happened in this country. You have to understand the people that they were lynching. We're talking about business owners, activists. Many of them were also Republicans, because during that time you had the Dixiecrats and you had the political rivalries between the Republicans, who were more on the reform progressive side, especially during that time, that many of these people were murdered. And this is what enacted people to come to the North. And that should be it. The next slide is just the resources. I believe, yes, the interior resources. That's it.
Well, thank you so much, Floyd. This is very shocking to hear. I mean, it's of course it's eye-opening. All your three presentations are extremely eye-opening, and I think that to see how the injustice runs so deep, and how this is also ingrained in the setup of institutions, and basically going into the whole history of the United States, and how that step where we are today can be traced back all the way, step by step, how this is not, not an insular situation, but actually a logical step-by-step evolution. And so now it's up to us and everybody to change course and put something new on the table. we do have some questions, and we do have some time for questions. Since you have links in the material, and there was also other material in Donna's and Jordie's slides. So just wanted to say, yes, we're going to put the slides as a PDF, I guess, online, or a link to the Google Doc. We'll figure that out afterwards, but we'll publish that so you have access to it. And of course, we're also trying to record the session, so there will be also access to that later on. Nevertheless, now we have a few minutes left. And there was a question coming to you, Floyd, from Jim Tucker. He's asking whether the USDA policies, whether they're still disadvantages for people of color, and especially for African-American farmers, or whether that's legacy from the past. What's your view on this, Floyd? So
I would not say that it's, I would not say that this is the USDA's legacy as of current, or excuse me, not legacy, excuse me, its policies as of current. But it is a part of its legacy. To keep in mind, when we go back to the USDA and its inception, that it started during the same time that the Homestead Act was created. So to give an idea, to give the mindset of the people that was running the USDA. Granted, one thing about a lot of these systems, right, is that when we talk about these institutions and these systems, on face value, it seems extremely inclusionary, that everybody is, but it's the mindset and the mentality of the people behind the gears, between the ones who can approve your application and those, who have that type of power. And it's the people that can sign off on whether you are able to get a loan, to get access to credit. To keep in mind, too, with that lawsuit, which is noted also in I did note, this happened in 1999. So this is very recent. I was a young child, so this is in my lifetime. So I will say my encounters with the USDA is current. Is that they are trying. I will give credit when credit is due. That many of those I've encountered, that they are trying to do their best to undo that legacy. And as much as Trump, he gets a lot of bad credit. He gets what is due to him. But on the agricultural end, particularly on the urban side, they have really stepped their game up in trying to address this legacy as best as possible. But the one thing that has to be noted is that the damage has been done. Not saying that it can't be undone, but the damage has been done. Black people in this country are in the state that they're in because of what happened, what the USDA did to Black people. Not just the USDA, okay, but through the Homestead Act and through these insurrections, pulled the economic footing from Black people, forced them into the urban centers. And then when you was able to gain some capital, let's say through the GI Bill after World War II, you couldn't gain access to that money, okay? And that's a whole nother situation. And then you could not leave that community and move into suburbia because of redlining and all the other hurdles that was placed into your way so that you could not gain any type of economic footing in this country. So no, it's not the current policies of the USDA, but I give them credit. They are trying their best to undo the legacy of the USDA, because this is its legacy. Okay, and there's no running away from it. But all you can do is just face with it, deal with it, and move forward.
Great, thank you. And if we have any more questions, we do have 5 minutes left in the hour. Otherwise, I can also relate, and it's a non-question. It's coming from Alex Alcorn. She works for the Carolina Farm Trust in North Carolina. And she's doing a lot of work with Black farmers to lift and support their work. And I'll connect the two of you. She would like to talk to you, Floyd, later on. Yeah, great.
That'd be great. Yes.
Yeah. And of course, if there are no questions, we can also follow this up. There's both there's a LinkedIn group where you can post things, but also on the Facebook group, and also to the email group. You can just shoot emails to the whole group. If you're not too, you know, it will go out to everybody on the email list, so be aware of that. But as long as you write just nice things, it shouldn't be too problematic. And of course, feel free to ask questions. Don't be shy about it. I think it's a time of learning for all of us. Learning to deal. We mentioned it in the beginning with the pandemic, how to live under the new normal in a sense. It's a way to live in a deep economic crisis. We really have all of that coming together, and it's a time of learning how to overcome racial inequalities and really, as Floyd said, stepping up the game, but also like really rethinking, as Jordie said, really having a new mindset whenever or whatever we do, thinking not only, this is climate innovation, but how can we also talk about racial inequality in this, and how can we just rethink broadening up our mindsets, basically, not being too narrow. And Donna, I think you made that point also so clear, that it's really about the mindsets. I want to thank all three of you for presenting here today. I know it's not really easy to talk about it because it's so ongoing. There's so much happening every day. We see things that make us want to scream every day in the news. And I think in that regard, it's good to have also this constructive forum here where we really talked about what can we do, what can I do, what can everybody do. And thank you also for sharing all these sources.